So unless you've been living under a bridge, you've probably seen one of these Mel hate threads at one point or another, complaining about how bullshit the kid is, how hard it is to verse, yada yada yada. And it really got me thinking, what is the ban rate? And I kind of saw this one of these recent posts about Mel, and I was surprised to see that Mel's ban rate was astronomically high at nearly all ranks. So I did some investigation and also noticed that the same four champions were basically banned at nearly all ranks. We've got Master Tier, Diamond, Platinum, and Gold, and we see kind of Zed, Mel, Yasuo, LeBlanc. And so, I was initially going to make a video specifically about Mel, really talking about why Mel is so misunderstood, but it really got me thinking, why not just cover these top four champions and really explore why is it that these champions have the highest ban rates across all servers and people fundamentally hate versus these champions or struggle to deal with these champions. So that's what this video is going to be all about. We're going to be solving these four champions and giving you hopefully a few different viewpoints or perspectives on why you may be struggling versus these four champions. So I want to kind of start by talking about the you shall not pass mindset. So there are many champions of the game that kind of I describe versing them as like being a mini game, right? They're not some standard archetypal champion like, a standard archetypal control mage or a standard archetypal assassin or standard archetypal tank. They kind of fit in their own little niche where they may have elements of maybe a particular archetype, but they're quite unique in the way they express their champ's identity. These exist not only in mid lane, but all other roles like Shaco, Evelynn, Rengar, Twitch, Bard, Pyke, Alawi, Quinn, Yorick are just a few, right? They're just a few examples. And so if you enter a game and you don't really have the knowledge to deal with them, or you don't really know what their champ's identity is and what their game plan is, a lot of the time you're going to get annihilated, right? The punishment for lacking that knowledge is very, very severe. It's like if you're playing a mini game and you don't know the rules of that mini game, oftentimes you're not really going to have a lot of success. And so it's kind of this like you shall not pass kind of dynamic where you either have the knowledge and then you can pass the skill test and you pass with flying colors, or you get slapped in the face and you're going back and you're losing that LP. And so Zed, Mel, LeBlanc, Yasuo are all in some way, shape, or form, obviously to differing degrees, an element of mini game champions. Maybe abilities of them, maybe certain abilities a little bit more minigame oriented than others. We'll get into that in a second, but I want to explore this concept a little bit more through the lens of Yasuo. So minigame time featuring Yasuo. Now, Yasuo is a very unique champion in the sense that regardless of what Yasuo is versing, you are basically able to do the exact same thing because Yasuo is a stat stick. Right? He's going to win the war of attrition most of the time. He's going to use E through those minions to close the gap for trades. He's going to have complete wave control, by the way. He's going to be able to stack Q off minions to create threat. He's got no mana, so he can spam abilities. He's going to use Windwall to block those key abilities, and he's going to abuse his strong early lane to create leads and control the wave and create positive scenarios. So it doesn't matter about, if Yasuo is versing an Echo, an Ori, a Hui, a Ari, whatever. He's basically doing the exact same thing, and there's nothing you can do about it for the most part. It's on Yasuo to mess up, and it's on you to maybe capitalize on those windows. But if the Yasuo is competent, it's really up to you to just weather the storm and play his game. That's really what is very annoying about Yasuo. This is why I genuinely believe that Yasuo is one of the best bans in the entire game for most mid laners, because you're not able to you're not playing your game anymore. The moment you load into a game and you're versing Yasuo, you're playing his game. No matter what, even if it goes bad or good for him, you're playing Yasuo's game. And that's the frustrating element about dealing with this champion. Now, I want to, before we go deeper and get into the nitty gritty here, at a high level, how do we begin thinking about dealing with these champions? Step number one is always, what is the mini game? What is that particular champion trying to achieve? What is that mini game that they're trying to do? Then, okay, now that I know what that champion's trying to do, how do I make it hard for them to execute that game plan? So I might enter a game versus Yasuo. It's like, okay, I know they're going to want to trade onto me early. Maybe they're going to want to bounce the wave out, create long lane states. They're going to try and win the war of attrition, yada, yada, yada. So then it's on me to try and figure out, okay, well, I know what they want to do. How do I make it difficult for them to do what they want to do? And I might want to try and pull waves a little bit more. I want to be careful with my mana usage. I need to be on point with my resets. I want to call for ganks or whatever the hell it might be. And then step number three is then I develop that muscle memory via practice and intentional testing, doing 1v1s or, getting into the matchup specifics. And so this leads to another question, what are the three genuine core reasons for banning? Like, why do we see these champions get banned so often? So the first one is you don't know the mini game of the champion. And I think Mel is a really great example of people just don't know what Mel does. They don't really understand the weaknesses of the kit. They don't really know how the kit fundamentally functions. And especially in the lower tiers, I think in the upper tiers, people kind of get it. But in the lower tiers, silver, gold, platinum, bronze, whatever, people just don't know what Mel does. They don't really know how the kit works. So I think that this is the main reason. The second reason is that you know the mini game, but you find it hard to handle. Some people may say this about Mel. They know what it does. They just find it hard to handle. I would beg to differ. We'll get into that in a second. I think this is very common for Zed, though. People know that the Zed's going to WEQ in your face, and they know they're going to do all these things, but you just struggle to deal with it. And the third one is that mini game of that champion counters your champion's identity. A classic example of this would be, let's say you're playing a lane bully type champion like Orianna, and you're versing a Yasuo. Well, this really sucks because as an Orianna, for the most part, my champ's identity is to get a lead early. I want to, not necessarily get a lead early, but I would say pressure my lane opponent, isolate the 1v1, ward and lean, yada, yada, yada. But Yasuo fundamentally counters that because I can't get lane control. I'm not going to be able to, win the war of attrition. I'm going to get slowly chipped down. And so Yasuo, you would find he does counter a lot of people's underlying champ identity or champion reference points, hence why he is such a good ban for a lot of champions. Now, there are some additional reasons to ban champions. These are just slightly less related to this particular video I'm making because we're going to be a little bit more focused on the lane phase. But the first of which is you can handle the champion in the lane, just not in the mid game. And this is a very common reason to ban, particularly for a champion like Yasuo, where you may be able to handle it in the lane, you can minimize, but in mid game, it's going to be a bit of a nuisance in the side lane. And this is why, even for me, I like banning Yasuo because I don't really play a lot of champions that can deal with Yasuo in the side lane. Another common reason is you find that particular champion creates particular game states that aren't really good for your champion. Another way of framing this would be that, again, that particular champion, again, it's okay. You can kind of handle it, but it creates scenarios that your champ's identity, your champ's reference points don't really align with. An example of this would be Galio. Galio can create particular game states, and not every champion can kind of deal with that. And the other one here is your pool just doesn't have an answer, right? You may do okay into it, but just in general, and you may even have all the knowledge to deal with it, but your champion pool that you're currently running doesn't really deal well with it. And there's no problem with that. That's completely viable. All of these are completely viable, reasons to ban champions. I just wanted to kind of air it out and make it very obvious that there are additional reasons. Now, what we're going to be doing now is going through a few different lane phases and as well as getting into the details of these kind of matchups through the lens of Ahri. Now, I chose Ahri because it's a relatively archetypal champion. It kind of does struggle into a lot of these champions, so it really allows me to kind of get into the weeds of the lane phase. Now, again, we're not going to be covering how to deal with these champions, holistically in the game because there's obviously a lot of things, but hopefully you can step away from this game, at least having, or step away from this video, having a little bit more clarity, specifically within the first 8 to 12 minutes. So I want to start by talking about Mel and some of the major errors and things that people need to understand about dealing with this champion. So Mel's W neutralizes certain lanes, right? So for example, Ahri, Zoe, Aurora, some of these kind of mid to low range champions, she does objectively quite well into, especially in the lower tiers. So what happens though in the lower tiers, specifically below Emerald, the Ahris and Zoes of the world will keep trying to kill the Mel instead of just simply playing for the wave. So what you'll see in the higher elo brackets, why people don't really struggle with Mel, is that you look at any good quality Ahri or Zoe or Aurora, they're not playing to win the 1v1. They're not playing to trade with the Mel. They're just constantly making Mel react to waves, standing outside the wave, and using offense as defense. And this is why Mel really struggles in the higher elo brackets, because these champs can kind of dictate the pace of the lane. Now, Mel's W punishes undisciplined play. If you're not patient and you're not patient around your ability usage, she can get a game-changing reflect. And typically in the lower elo brackets, people are very undisciplined. They can't help themselves from doing things, and they will end up just rushing an ability and let Mel get an incredibly valuable reflect. Again, I would say it's probably more common in the lower elo brackets, but it is inherently just common in solo queue in general. People struggle with the feeling of not doing something or saying no in league. Mel can be one of those champions where she fundamentally blocks you from doing something. She might control a choke point, or she may be holding that reflect. And so maybe, just maybe, the best play in a particular moment is to ignore her or play away from her or just shove the move and not interact or just shove and get a reset. But people really struggle with this idea of not doing something because Mel really struggles moving into the mid game. And so a lot of the time, if you just go even with Mel, you're going to win the mid game because Mel can't really function in the mid game. She can't function in the side lane. Mel's R damage is unintuitive. People don't realize she gets more damage the more damage she deals. So people extend trades and allow her R to stack. I would say this is more just not understanding her minigame, not really understanding how her kit works, which is kind of unintuitive for a mage. And then lastly, below emeralds, and this is the big one, horizontal movement and being hard to hit is not a common skill that is developed. A lot of people don't really know how to engage in that game of dodgeball, where it's like, okay, I do need to be a little bit slippery. I do need to be engaging in some horizontal movement, being a little bit hard to hit, which leads to Mel landing a lot more ease than she should. Her abilities are actually hard to land. Her Q is a very, I mean, sure, she might clip you with one little projectile, but unless you're standing still or she's landing her root, her Q is not going to deal that much damage. And her E is a very, very hard to hit slow projectile. So if you're competent with your movement and horizontal movement, positioning, you're never really going to get significant damage down or dealt to you, by a Mel. And this is why, again, in the lower elo brackets, Mel really, I would say, thrives comparatively to the upper echelons. So let's go ahead and take a look at an example of one of the most common Mel matchups. So what we've got here is the El Clasico Ari versus Mel matchup. And I've just pulled a random VOD from Domisum, and this is an Ari versus Mel in Korea Grandmaster. So what we're going to be doing here is talking about, obviously, the interactions of the kit, but we're also going to be talking about the high-level strategy. And so first things first, Ari has a lot of good, movement speed through the W. So you'll see a lot of beautiful Ari players using that W somewhat reactively to avoid those skill shots. So even from level 1, what we're already seeing is the W start, which I like, or the nice little auto W auto, trying to proc that electrocute. And as you can see, Mel finding it very difficult to get a lot of value from that Q because Ari's just moving in such a slippery manner. And Ari's just constantly trying to trim the wave with those auto attacks to make sure she doesn't get massively slow built on. Also, look at Ari's movement. She's trying to be very jagged with her movement, using that W reactively to avoid as much of those Qs as humanly possible. And so the mentality in this matchup is that, yes, you are going to take a lot of damage. Yes, it is going to be a bit of a heavy trading matchup, and that's okay. That benefits you as Ari because you don't mind playing a bit of a fast lane. We can go back for an early Dark Seal. That's okay. And so what I'm going to be looking for as this lane goes on is Ari using Qs through the wave, using offense as defense, and trying to kind of shove the wave and make Mel react. So as you can see here again, a nice little kind of creative W, using that W kind of to get that movement speed, get the level 2 first, go for a high value Q through the wave onto the Mel to proc that Electro. And we're already kind of making it quite messy, playing the lane quite fast. Notice how Ari is playing this lane quite aggressive with abilities. We're definitely not afraid to trade here. A lot of beautiful horizontal movement, jagged movement, making it hard for Mel to get a lot of value from that Q. Look, if we just freeze frame here, look at this movement. Beautiful horizontal movement, baiting out those abilities, using that W to close the gap. Now, Mel here went W level 2. Okay, that means that W is on a very, very long cooldown. We don't need to be afraid anymore. And this is where, look at this, because we're engaging in those very beautiful, jagged movements. We're constantly shoving in the wave. This is where we can start to regain a lot of this lane control that we missed out on level 1. And so the longer the lane goes, in a way, it kind of gets easier because as Ari, your wave clear is so significant, you don't really have to engage with this Mel too often. But again, Ari really looking for those high value Qs. Beautiful, again, horizontal movement here, baiting out those E's. Look how hard it is for Mel to land that E because of the movement speed from the W. And this is where Ari is just going to slowly win that war of attrition. Again, more Qs. Mel can't be reflecting them because if she reflects them, she's going to go or that key ability is going to stay on cooldown. Again, Mel really struggling to land those E's. Walking up nice and aggressively, beautiful high value Qs through the wave onto the Mel. We've got complete lane control now. We're definitively winning that war of attrition, and Mel's now definitively on the back foot. And what you would see if this were played out in, let's say, Silver, the Ari wouldn't be going for those high value Qs. They would be getting hit by each and every one of those E's. They wouldn't be engaging in horizontal movement. So Mel would be getting a lot of value from those Qs and E's. And the whole dynamic of the lane would look very different because then would be too low to contest the wave. So we'll fast forward a little bit here. We go for a nice little early Dark Seal refill reset. We TP back. Beautiful. And so what I'm going to be looking for again here is nice little reactive W's, beautiful horizontal movement to avoid those E's, constantly moving in a lot of jagged directions, being hard to hit, playing that game of dodgeball. We get that reflect out from Mel nice and early here. We're never standing still. And honestly, I think Ari could be doing a slightly better job of making sure the Qs are hitting through the entire wave. I think we could, obviously we're not at our wave clip breakpoint yet, but still nonetheless, the more we can make this Mel react to the wave, the easier our life is going to be. Nice, nice, nice. And remember, as an Ari, we have significantly better 2v2 threat and, skirmishing in the river, right? As soon as we get that level 6, that's when we're going to be able to, get work done with our jungler. So I like what Ari does here as well. Notice how the patience on the ability usage doesn't go for any wild charms. Is not trying to like coin flip any random ability usage. And the Mel actually panicked with the W there, probably anticipating the charm. But this Mel, stayed resolute, didn't focus. Sorry, this Ari stayed resolute, didn't rush any abilities and was able to kind of bait out that Mel W. And again, using offense as defense. Now we do get clipped by that EQ, and take a look at that. Look at how much of a difference it makes. When you get hit by that E and you get queued like that, that's where the lane gets really tricky. So as an Ari, if you find yourself in this sort of scenario where you are getting clipped, you really want to make sure you're being quite proactive with your reset. So what I'd be looking for here from an Ari perspective is maybe even looking for just a Q through the wave into a tempo reset. You could do that. Mel's trying to get in our face. That's okay. Ari's having to be a little bit respectful here, knowing that she got clipped by that ability before. So, it is what it is. That's the suffering the consequences. And remember, this is traditionally even a counter pick. So if we're going even into a Mel, you're very, very, very happy. Because again, moving into mid game, your life is going to be significantly easier. Okay, so I think this play here is quite creative. I think Ari probably realized Mel's too far up in the lane. She can get a lot of value from that R to close the gap. And then Mel had to burn flash there. And we get a beautiful little bit of pressure relief. Now, an argument could be made, honestly, if I'm going to be being a little bit nitpicky, for Ari just to Q this wave, W it, insta reset on the cannon. I think that would be probably arguably a little bit more aligned with Ari's identity. But Ari chose to go for the aggressive R and burn the Mel flash. And that's personal preference at the end of the day. So we'll fast forward a little bit here. We go for a nice reset again. And again, this is what we're really looking for as an Ari. We're typically looking for these sorts of skirmishes. And this is where our champion thrives a little bit more than Mel. We're kind of getting into the weeds here where Ari doesn't have R, so she's kind of struggling a little bit. But, the longer the lane goes, we'll fast forward a little bit. This is where you're typically going to just be engaging a lot of offense as defense. So we're going to be queuing the wave a lot. Either tempo resetting or looking to shove and move and complement our jungler because Mel can't really prevent us from doing so. It obviously helps here that Ari picked up some kills at that skirmish, but I think the rest is kind of history here, and it looks like Rengar comes through and gets a nice little gank off. So what I like about this VOD is that it's not perfect, it's scrappy, it's solo queue, but we did see beautiful reactive W usage, leveraging that movement speed to avoid skill shots. We saw Ari standing outside the wave to make Mel make a choice between us and the wave. We saw high value Qs where Ari's trying to use offense as defense and make Mel react, and we saw good ability usage patience, not rushing those charms, baiting out those Mel Ws, and kind of slowly, playing a faster paced lane and not allowing Mel to isolate the 1v1. Now, admittedly, Ari could have done some things better here and there, but you can kind of see how this is a very different dynamic to what you guys would probably see in your games when you're versing Mel, especially if you're watching this as an Ari main. Now, moving on to Zed, some major errors here. So your ability to deal with Zed largely depends on your confidence in avoiding the WEQ combo. And so one of the biggest pain points is that one WEQ combo to the face will undo all of your previous work, hence the frustration. This is where poison patience is crucial. So typically what you see in a lot of people's games versus Zed, they're doing well, doing really, really well. And then all that happens is that Zed lands one really good WEQ, especially later on, maybe level 7, level 8. It undoes all of that beautiful work. The player versing Zed loses that poison patience. They get flustered. They maybe overstay. They miss a reset window. They die. They get snowballed on, and then they start complaining about the champion and ban it in the next game. And look, I get it. Zed can be a little bit annoying. But, it's just important to realize that, the more competent you are dealing with this combo, the easier your life is going to be. So Zed's WEQ combo is usually not learnt how to be dealt with properly. For the most part, people build poor habits and mental blocks are created. You must learn how the combo works before the fear sets in. Typically, what you see is people not baiting it out nor engaging in horizontal movements such that Zed is able to land majority of those combos. Another key problem is not respecting that W shadow and moving into it, allowing Zed to get on top of you, not understanding how to CC Zed post 6 properly with the R obviously going behind you always, and then not punishing Zed's high W cooldown when it is down. So let's go ahead and take a look at an example. So diving into another example, we've also taken a look at another Ari lens. Okay. And I thought it would be cool if all of the examples can be through one champion's lens so we can kind of maybe lower the amount of variables at play here. So this Ari has decided to kind of do offense as defense, playing for a very, hard, one wave crash, which I don't know if I fully agree with. Maybe it has something to do with the vertical jungles going on here. You want that additional prio. Typically, you would want to see some sort of a slow build. Zed traditionally has a very weak levels, kind of like one to three, and even like levels 3, 4, 5, not that strong. So you typically can kind of bully Zed pre-6, and then post-6, it gets a little bit more annoying. So what I'm going to be looking for in this lane is hopefully some horizontal movement, baiting out those WEQs, using W reactively to avoid some of those, combos, as well as try and punish Zed a little bit, pre-6. It's also worth noting that this particular Zed went Electro Ignite. Whenever you're versing Zed, it's always very important to factor in what setup you're versing. If you're versing a first strike TP, that's going to be very different to versing an Electro Ignite. Electro Ignite means a lot more burst threat post 6, a little bit less scaling. So, obviously a little bit more early damage. Same thing with itemization. This Zed went D shield, didn't go D blade, didn't go longsword. A few little, I guess, changes that are worth noting there. So just timing our abilities with large sets beautifully, punishing the ranged into melee here, constantly being the one that is slow building into the Zed. And this is typically what you would want to see. Doesn't matter if you're playing Ari, Ori, whatever. So let's take a look at the first WEQ combo. This is where people start to experience pain. So Zed's now level 3. Zed's going for that WE. Typically what Zed wants to do is cast that WE on one side of your character to usher you into a particular kind of direction and then land both of the daggers, or the shuriken, sorry. And so here, notice how Ari does a little bit of a wiggle. She goes in one direction and then goes a different direction. So she ran that way and then she ran that way. So she kind of did a bit of fancy footwork there to avoid those cues. And look at that already. We are safe to kind of pressure and do whatever the hell she wanted. And she also felt confident to walk past the shadow here, knowing that Zed had no cooldowns and that she could also stand her ground because she, she hadn't shown that she didn't level up charm. So now again, we can continue to bully. And now Zed's W is on cooldown, so we don't really need to be nervous at all. And notice how Ari here was able to go for a beautiful auto W there, not being afraid of the W cooldown because it was down. Making sure we're not standing behind those low minions, so Zed isn't able to get those high value, Qs. Notice the distance here as well, guys. Look at this. Look at this beautiful movement here for a second. I just want to highlight this. Was so goddamn nice. So Zed, obviously, we've gone our last hits, and now Zed starts moving up. So Zed knows that Ari has no W. We know that Zed's W is up, so the mind game begins, right? Where, we know that what Zed's going to try and do. So Ari automatically is backing up, trying to keep that maximal distance between Zed and ourselves. And so she backs up. And notice our movement here, again, wiggling in different directions, goes this way, this way, this way, this way, trying to be, engaging in that fancy footwork to try and be hard to hit. And then Zed actually does, something quite nice, tries to time that Q with the last hit, but nonetheless, Ari was very, very slippery and ends up voiding those shurikens. And now look at this. We are 3 minutes in the lane. We're nice and healthy. We've got complete lane control, and this looks night and day difference to comparatively to a lot of other Ari players versus this matchup. And it really comes down to playing around those cooldowns, beautiful little jagged movement around those Ws, not being afraid of, walking up when Zed's abilities are on cooldown. And this is a really great example of that. So here, Ari actually goes very aggressive, walks straight up past the W there, feels confident to do so because she also has Ignite as well, which is also worth noting, and gets a nice little chunk. I actually really like this reset from Ari. A common mistake you see when people verse Electro Ignite Zed is they stay too long in limited resources and they get really low and they typically die. So remember, when you're versing Ignite users, you want to make sure that you're staying nice and healthy to prevent yourself from, getting into kill threat range. So unfortunately, runs into a Karthus, does get a bit punished there, but that's okay. Okay, so it's kind of rinse repeat here. Fast forward. I guess some shenanigans happening here. Looks like both people were trying to help fix the wave. Our jungler came through. I don't want to overcomplicate that. We'll fast forward. We didn't get any kills, so it didn't really change anything. We've now got our lost chapter, and this set is working towards probably their Eclipse or something, or Voltaic, with the pickaxe. So now let's take a look at the lane as it starts to get, getting closer to that level 6 and beyond. So we're seeing the same thing, right? Zed throws that WE out. We use our W reactively, engage in those weird horizontal movements to try and be hard to hit. Now that W is going to be on cooldown, we can walk up and we can maybe fish for some trades here. So we get our level 6 first. We posture up nice and aggressively, try to get in range, utilizing our W to get a nice little trade. Again, we're only able to do that because that ZW is on cooldown. Now Zed is walking up. His Z is his W is going to be off cooldown soon, so we got to be a little bit careful here. And notice there's that kind of push and pull dynamic here. And remember, our job is we're not there to necessarily kill Zed. We're there to kind of make Zed sweat for farm and really make sure that we are playing in accordance to our reference points. A lot of people, when they verse Zed, they get caught up in the whole rat race of, I got to kill Zed. I got to shut him down. He's going to scale. But no, just relax, do your job, constantly slow build waves, ward and lean, and you're going to be A-okay. So this Zed, this Ari got a bit of prio, ends up going for a roam. That's okay. We'll fast forward a little bit longer here. We come back. Some more shenanigans. Looks like Zed tries to kill our jungler. We try to complement him. So I don't really want to get into this. It's not really, overly significant. So I just want to come back to go to when Zed comes back. Okay, so it looks like we have to burn our R defensively. This is where people do find themselves being in a bit of a sticky scenario. When we don't have our mobility available, people get a little bit scared, and that's okay. You may have to sack a bit of prio. You might have to be a little bit more conservative when your R is down. That's okay. So now that we have no R, we'll be interested to see how this Ari plays it. And remember, as Ari specifically, your major reference point is to get to your wave clear breakpoint, typically around level 8, level 9, whereby you're going to be popping those waves and not really interacting as much. And notice how Ari here does a really good job of just keeping distance, stays for that cannon, holds that charm reactively, keeps distance well away from that shadow, and it goes for a nice little preemptive recall to stay nice and healthy. And now, by this time in the lane, Zed's going to be trying to shove and move. We're also going to be shoving and moving. And typically, there's not really going to be a ton of interaction at this stage of the lane. So, what we can take away from this and what I guess some of the key differences are, again, beautiful reactive W usage here for the movement speed, even if you're not playing Ari though. Again, those jagged horizontal movements when Zed's going for those WEQs, really making sure we're anticipating those WEQs by trying to keep that distance, paying a lot of close attention to Zed's W cooldown and really making it hard for him to land it. And when that W was on cooldown, we can posture up and then look for those trading windows. And then we also saw, I guess later on, or earlier on, a lot of slow building and harassing, trying to bully that Zed early game, and punishing his long cooldowns and punishing the fact that he doesn't really have a lot of kill threat onto us. And typically by the late stage of the lane, lead to level 8, level 9, level 10, it becomes a little bit less about trying to solo kill, more about controlling, restricting the Zed, keeping wave control, warding and leaning, and again, constantly playing around that WEQ combo. So again, I tried to keep it simple by picking the same champion tip, but you can kind of see some of the key differences, or hopefully you see some of the key differences between what you're noticing in your Zed games versus what this Ari player did here. Now, moving on to LeBlanc. Now, LeBlanc, I guess, gives us a few unique challenges to deal with. The first one is that every single LeBlanc lane is going to play slightly differently. And this is one of the major challenges you face in this matchup. So the way I view it is that you never want to come in with like this set game plan. Like, this is exactly the waves are going to play out. This is exactly kind of what I need to do. It's more about being prepared for dynamic trading. Don't tunnel vision on the set strategy as much as understanding how the ability interactions work, right? As long as you understand how the kits fundamentally interact, then a lot of the strategy will naturally unfold. And, the key is adaptability and versatility. So, a common problem is not spacing that W. Our mental sack is not appropriately thinking about that ability. And if we get hit by each and every W, our life is going to be miserable. Not respecting the post-6 spike with a double distortion. Not using minions to avoid chains, nor contemplating which minions are getting low, which leaves us exposed to those chains. Failing to tempo reset or panic when the lane gets played very fast. Or failing to hold CC reactively to deal with that kind of engaged threat through the LeBlanc W. Now, moving into another example, this is actually Faker playing Ari versus LeBlanc. Now, this VOD here is such a good example of how to play this matchup. It is so incredibly advanced. So there's so many layers here that I do want to talk about. But what this lane example shows is attention to detail with resets, not being afraid to trade a little bit. And again, very, very kind of intentional ability usage. So early lane, Ari is going to struggle. I mean, this is a hard matchup for Ari, in my opinion. This LeBlanc's doing a very good job of proccing that bone plating non-committally. Faker here obviously keeping distance from the LeBlanc W, not allowing LeBlanc to get in that W range. We're trying to use that W somewhat reactively there. And again, understanding that, yeah, we are not going to be able to bully LeBlanc. It's okay. We are probably going to lose a little bit of lane control, but that's okay. As long as we don't get in that W range, we hold our charm somewhat reactively. We try to use these minions to block those chains, well, then we're going to be somewhat okay, or at least we'll have enough resources to tempo reset. So as you can see, Faker here trying to go for those nice little fadeaway Qs, trying to anticipate LeBlanc moving in from that W. Obviously, because Ari is not the highest range champion, our spacing needs to be incredibly on point. You can see how he's being very, very intentional with that spacing there. We're not really afraid of the level 2 because LeBlanc doesn't have chain. So we can stand up kind of outside the wave. And as soon as LeBlanc gets level 3, that's when it gets a little bit more spicy. So it's okay. We've lost lane control. That's not the end of the world. We are going to heavy trade. That's inevitable. But we have TP. That's okay. No biggie. I love the reactive W usage there to keep out a distance. We go for a nice preemptive recall. Well, actually, we're going to go for a preemptive recall. Ends up going for the fake recall instead, and then tries to mop up the remaining of this farm. Now, we've got to be very careful here because LeBlanc does have Ignite. So, as you can see, Faker here holding that charm beautifully reactively, trying to really min-max the amount of gold he can go back to base with so he can kind of be maximally strong on that first recall. And realize here that, again, this lane could have played out a trillion ways. It depends on what LeBlanc wanted to do. LeBlanc could have shoved and bounced. LeBlanc could have played more conservative. LeBlanc could have been more aggressive. We have no idea as an Ari here. So our entire mentality is not about fussing over the wave. As long as the wave isn't stuck on LeBlanc's side and we have the wave in nice little conservative positions to some sort of degree, and as long as we are spacing those Ws and not getting hit by those charms and holding out reactively, then that's okay. And now, obviously, we're looking at it through the lens of Ari here, but the same thing applies for every other matchup. As long as you're understanding how the kits interact and how the ranges work, then the strategy will kind of play itself as long as you understand where you don't want the wave to be. The wave it could be in neutral, it could be slightly on our side. That's okay. It just needs to not be stuck outside LeBlanc's tower. So now he's successfully minimized, right? He's got to the point where he's got a decent amount of gold on his first recall. That's going to make him, quite strong. So now he mops up the remaining farm, gets a beautiful little recall. The wave is now bouncing out. He bases in TPs, get a dark seal with the refill there. So now our charm is down. So this is where we got to be a little bit careful. So this is where he kind of messed up a little bit here. I think he got a little bit greedy there, trying to chunk the Lee Sin. Maybe he thought that Neferi and the Lee Sin were going to fight each other. But now he has no W, no Q, no E, and he got a little bit close, which is what actually allowed LeBlanc to get into W range. The other thing that's worth noting here is notice how he engaged in the horizontal movement, preemptively anticipating that LeBlanc is going to look for a chain. So those horizontal movements really coming in clutch to avoid those skill shots there. Because what does LeBlanc want to do? She wants to go for the W, into the chain, into the auto Q, and really kind of get that extended trade. And so as Ari here, we're already completely chunked. We've burnt both of our refills. So already, because LeBlanc is a very lane-dominant champion and you can typically stat check us, we need to be very intentional about our resets. So if I'm Ari in this situation, I'm really thinking, how do I get myself a recall? How do I stay nice and healthy here? So it looks like Faker just accepts reality that the wave may have actually been frozen and just goes for the reset. And quite honestly, this is something that I admire and I don't see a lot of players do. LeBlanc didn't freeze here, but Faker was probably okay with LeBlanc freezing because the reality is that he had lost lane control. He took those really, really bad trades. He can't afford to stay in lane with limited resources into a LeBlanc, especially approaching level 6 where LeBlanc's kill threat gets incredibly high. And even more so in this case because the LeBlanc actually has Ignite as well. So very, very admirable reset there. Very preemptive, reset to stay nice and healthy. Notice the patience on the charm usage there, plays the mind game beautifully, and then again, trying to space out that LeBlanc W here. And now we can just let the wave come in. That's okay. And notice how in this game, how intentional Faker's, positioning here has been. He's really tried to make it hard for LeBlanc to get into that W range. This was actually an incredibly nice chain there from Faker. He just lent into it because he got hit by it. So we had to just look for that trade. Trades on the back end, punishing those cooldowns, trim the wave. This is a small little technical thing that you can do into a lot of lane bullies. You do the same thing to Yasuo. Don't kill the whole wave, but you leave a little bit of minions there to then let the next wave meet in a more conservative location. So rather than it meeting over here, it meets over here. And then we one-shot the next wave, and then we can tempo reset again. And so notice how Ari, has kind of successfully gone through this lane without really kind of interacting. He's just trying to play ping pong. He's just trying to play the tempo game. And this is what a lot of champions can try to do into LeBlanc, because fundamentally, if you stay in lane, you try to stat check the LeBlanc, you're going to struggle. LeBlanc will stat check you. You will lose. So leverages that bone plating, takes an okay trade to make sure he doesn't lose too much wave control, trying to time those Qs with last hits. We're kind of getting to the late stage of the lane. The longer the lane goes, the easier it's going to get for Ari, because what's going to happen is that we're going to get to our wave clear breakpoint. Try to use our W reactively there. Can't quite get out of range of the chain. That's okay. And then any opportunity to play for 2v2s here makes a lot of sense, playing with our jungler. We end up getting a little bit outplayed there. Well played to Lisa and LeBlanc. That's okay. We'll fast forward. Not really overly relevant for this particular VOD. And now we're at the late stages. I mean, we've gone relatively even with the LeBlanc. We've never had the wave in bad positions. We've stayed relatively healthy through the entirety of the lane. We've engaged in those horizontal movements when the chains have been coming out. We've been trying to leverage that bone plating whenever possible. And again, most importantly, we've really kept those distance to space those Ws. This here is what you want to avoid. And I would say this here, by the way, is what you would typically see. And like if this matchup would play out on gold, this is what you would see. LeBlanc would QW, auto, boom, and you get chunked. Ari couldn't charm because he's inside the wave, couldn't really respond because he didn't have bone plating, and so you just get completely annihilated. And these are the trades that you really want to avoid. I would say that's probably the ugliest trade we saw from Faker throughout the entirety of the lane. I mean, he's not a robot after all, but that's the sort of, trade that will lose you a lot of lane control. You'll make your life very miserable, and it'll make it hard for you to kind of keep up your farm. And so the rest of this is pretty straightforward. We're just keeping our distance again, really trying to hold our charm reactively, allowing the waves to come in, catching those waves ASAP, such that, again, we're not allowing, LeBlanc to get too much prio. And again, we're staying adaptable for those potential river skirmishes with our team. And then whenever we need to reset, we're getting low on resources. We have, super decisive, leveraging our high wave clear to get those beautiful little reset windows. So what I would take away from this is intentionality with CC and Peel, which is really good to see. Intentionality with resets, not being afraid to play a faster lane and stay nice and healthy to prevent LeBlanc from leveraging that early kill threat. Really making sure that we're trying to keep the wave on our side as much as possible. If the wave is in this sort of location, that's better than the wave being on LeBlanc's side. So wave management was very intentional. And again, beautiful horizontal movement to avoid those kind of chains, and beautiful spacing on the LeBlanc W as well. So a lot of small little details there go a long way to developing a good quality, minimizing lane. Moving on to Yasuo, major errors. So Yasuo is the ultimate lane control champion. 95% of champions will have to concede priority into Yasuo, and that's okay. Relax, let him lose the game on his terms. And that's kind of the mindset when versing Yasuo. So not allowing Yasuo to overshove and not making Yasuo sweat for crash is a major problem. What you typically see with a lot of people into Yasuo is that they kind of maybe overshove and make it easy for Yasuo to kind of hold the wave on his side, or they don't make Yasuo sweat for crashing the wave. If we can keep the wave on our side to the best of our ability, that's going to make it hard for Yasuo to bounce. That's going to limit his trading windows. He can't E on top of us because he's too close to the tower. It's also going to increase the amount of kill threat to ganks that we have as well. Not keeping distance from casters to prevent E-dash. This is another one. So again, this will make more sense when we get into the examples, but keeping distance from casters, goes a very long way to preventing Yasuo from getting on top of us. Not accounting for the re-dash in. Yasuo is going to go in, out a lot of the time. Mindset, failure to allow Yasuo to trip over himself. There's this kind of inherent kind of feeling of being pressured to death versus Yasuo. Yasuo is controlling the wave. He's shoving you in. He's kind of being relentless. But the reality is that at some point, Yasuo is going to mess up, whether he messes up in the early game or whether he messes up in the mid game. The champion is very difficult to execute moving into mid game. So the reality is that you're just trying to buy time for him to blunder and find a window, find an opportunity back into the game. Another common problem, again, similar to LeBlanc, not holding that CC reactively or not punishing his power trough in the late lane when he's kind of building those components towards Bork. So let's go ahead and get into an example. So moving on to our Yasuo example, we have Faker on Ari. Again, he's infamous Ari. This Yasuo is going for a very archetypal pick with the lethal tempo, D shields. The only thing worth noting setup-wise for Faker here is that he's gone bone plating secondary, which obviously is quite good into a lot of melees. So at a high level, what we're going to be seeing here, hopefully, is Faker trying to keep the wave on his side, make Yasuo sweat for the crash, not getting too caught up in the trades, because obviously Yasuo is going to win that war of attrition with the D shield. And our goal is to really, focus on our farm. And again, wait for those opportunistic blunders, wait for those windows where we can fight with our jungler. The more we can keep the wave on our side, the easier our life is going to be. I love those beautiful those beautiful reactive W's there from Faker, keeping distance from the Yasuo and making it hard for Yasuo to take those extended trades. So here, I think Faker was probably a little bit greedy, but that's okay. We do proc the Electro on the back end. Okay. So the wave's going to crash. Not really too much we can do about it. A lot of Yasuos are going to go for that 2-wave stack. That's just the way the matchup goes. And 95% of matchups are going to go. So this is the big challenge when you're versing Yasuo. What happens off this bounce? And it's going to depend on what the Yasuo does. So our goal is to try and keep the wave in this location or get it definitively crashing, one or the other, depending on what the opposing Yasuo does. So if we can actually incentivize Yasuo to trade onto us, that's beautiful. If not, then again, we can go for a nice little slow build. So there's kind of two ways it plays out. So ideally, if we can proc that shield, that would be lovely. We're in a pretty conservative position here. We burn that wind wall, knowing that Yasuo had no minions to dash through. Notice how, because the wave's in this location, Yasuo can't really dash through these minions, and there's no minions over here. So we can actually freely space and tether this Yasuo, really punishing the fact that his mobility is tied to minions. And because we're using our W here, we're being really tight with our spacing. Yasuo is not really able to get an E range, so we can kind of just do some work there, burn that wind wall nice and early. So now the wave is bouncing out, and this is where we got to be a little bit careful. Depends on your intention. Now, some Aries, a common mistake is that they keep playing for the wave. The wave gets frozen. They don't have enough resources or strength or, again, wave clear to get the wave out. And the wave gets stuck here and they get themselves into really sticky scenarios. Other Aries don't shove enough when they need to shove. So it's a balance. It depends on what your interpretation is here. So we'll see what Faker does here. It looks like he's maybe holding off on that Q here. He's maybe trying to incentivize Yasuo to trade onto him. Then he realizes Yasuo is not, so he's trying to go for a hard shove here. The wave may be in an awkward position here, trying to stand our ground in the big wave. Notice how we're using our abilities very reactively here. Proc that shield. Stand our ground. Notice how we don't rush our charm immediately. We actually hold, wait for him to rush that wind wall, then we charm, and then we auto, then we W. And so Yasuo is able to use that long lane. We get a really, really, nasty trade, but that's just the Yasuo matchup. There's not really much we can do about that. The positive, though, of that trade, by the way, guys, is that now the wave's going to be in a much better position. But Xin Zhao's hovering, so, it looks like Faker wanted to use his jungler's presence to make sure we fix the wave state. So this wave, this matchup is all about the wave. If the wave's in a good position, we're going to be okay. If the wave's in an ugly position, it's not going to be okay. Okay, bit of an ugly scenario here. Okay, so look, I think for me, if I were watching this, I would probably like to see Faker ping back here. This is not really our scuttle. Bot has move. I think he got a little bit caught up in the chaos here, trying to fight into their strengths. To be honest, it was a good move though from the Alistar. Potentially his mental stack was overwhelmed. That's okay. So Yasuo gets an early double kill. We TP back. Look at this. Notice how he pulls the wave out here. He walks past the wave to try and pull the wave, and now he can set up a freeze. So he tries to set up the freeze there, pulls the wave in the process of chasing away the Yasuo, and now we're in a scenario where we are able to temporarily freeze, deny a little bit of farm here. And this is where the lane gets really tricky for Ahri. This Yasuo got an early double kill. He's on a pretty solid first base with the Berserker Reeves and the dagger. So this is where we're on full minimizing, neutralizing duty. We don't have any wave control comparatively to the Yasuo, and that's okay. We're here to try and make Yasuo sweat for the wave to the best of our ability. Okay, so we ping the ward. Yasuo shoving in. We're using our charm reactively there. Beautiful. And as long as the wave's in this pocket, we're pretty happy. Notice the spacing and the tethering there, and again, the reactive W usage. Notice how we're not seeing AoE Qs. A common problem you'll see from players here in these scenarios, they get so caught up in the trades, you would see Ahri queuing through the wave onto the Yasuo. And what would that do? That would overshove the wave. The next wave would meet somewhere down here, and then you're completely screwed because you wouldn't have the ability to break the freeze. So as you can see, there's a lot of discipline from Faker here, not using that Q, or if he is going to use the Q, making sure that he's trying to stand outside the wave first. And again, really incentivizing Yasuo to trade into him with the wave in this sort of pocket. And notice how even though this Yasuo is 2-0, he hasn't really been able to bounce the wave out yet because Faker's just been a little bit of a nuisance. Rel's in the area. Yasuo's perma hard shoving. We're trying to make something happen here with our support. The enemy support was also hovering, so a little bit of an overeager R there from Faker. That's okay. And now we have our TP, so we're okay. So Yasuo overshoves again. We catch the wave under tower. Looks like we try to get dove. That's okay. We'll fast forward. Then we base TP, come back, insta-shove the wave to make sure the wave actually shoves and bounces, or at least at minimum goes back to neutral state. And now, we are, at 7 minutes 30, basically even in farm. We haven't really got set too far behind, and we've got ourselves in a position where we can just kind of, just scale beautifully moving into that mid game. So notice the reactive E usage there, trying to keep distance from the Yasuo to the best of our ability. And even if we do take bad trades here, that's okay. We're getting close to our wave clear breakpoint where we're just going to be able to tempo reset on repeat. And so now this, even though this looks kind of lucky, this is what you'll see versus Yasuo players. They're going to die to ganks. This is kind of basically what happens. Yasuo's biggest weakness, or the challenge Yasuo faces, is how do I shove and, basically stack up my Q on the wave and use my E through the wave while also simultaneously not dying to ganks, but also not ruining my wave state. So Yasuo is a difficult to execute champion. Obviously has a high skill cap. If you're versing a very competent Yasuo, there's going to be varying levels of problems that you're going to face, but this is in Challenger in Korea, right? So if it's happening in Challenger in Korea, I could bet your bottom dollar that it's probably going to happen in your games, Emerald and NNA, for example. So now we're at the late lane here. This is where we can look for skirmishes. And typically at this point, we're not really interacting anymore, just popping those waves and shoving and hovering. And that's kind of lane over. So look, what I like about this is there was a lot of discipline with ability usage. We weren't seeing random AoE Qs ruining the wave states, getting the wave stuck on Yasuo's side. We leveraged our jungler's location to make sure, we were able to get the wave crashing under tower when our jungler was in the area. We used our W very reactively to space the Yasuo and use our E reactively, which is beautiful. We didn't rush our abilities when he had wind wall. We tried to bait the wind wall first, then use our self peel, which I loved as well. And again, the beautiful decisiveness of those reset windows, making sure whenever we're getting low, whenever we knew we were getting low on resources, we would pump those waves out, beautiful, shove into a reset, which, kept us nice and healthy and got us to our wave clear breakpoint. And so, this is I would say the best possible iteration of how the matchup can play out, but it's all those small subtle things that get you into a position, not whereby you're going to win the matchup, but you're going to be able to neutralize the matchup and give yourselves a foothold moving into the mid game. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. So I want to end this video with a question to you guys. Why do you ban these champions? Is it because of reasons that we haven't really covered today? Is it because more of mid-game? Or just fundamentally just don't enjoy dealing with that champion? I'd love to hear more about you guys, why you ban the champs that you do, and try to be, be a little bit thoughtful with your comment rather than just, the champ is OP. Try to give me a little bit of a reason because I'm genuinely intrigued. Otherwise, I'll see you for another video soon. Cheers.